Current polls only have a 9% response rate of their targeted pool of telephones. 9%. Those of you who've done any statistical theory might want to think about how can you make inferences about the sampling distribution of the parameter estimates that you're trying to estimate if you've only got 9% of your random sample. You can't. It's not science. And we have to have scientific standards. And we do at the top tier. Well, usually. One of the things that this has led to is that many of these conservative foundations want to use public opinion to change public opinion. What you ask, how you ask it, who you ask it to, can cause people to think things about what other people think. And if everybody else thinks this, then maybe you might too. Or maybe you'll falsify what you think so that you can go along with the rest of the crowd. But mostly what it is about what are we going to care about? What questions are going to be asked? Who's going to be determining what the important questions are? And what are going to be on our few studies that we have is going to be a big deal. Because of the dearth of funding, these foundations have been enormously influential in getting legitimate scholars who aren't even conservatives to go after their money. If you're a criminologist, are you going to examine stuff on inequalities and racial disparities in arrest or sentencing? And apply for that little dwindling budget from the National Institute of Justice that might be directed towards that? Well, the Templeton Foundation will give you $250,000 if you want to study how religion has a positive effect on schooling outcomes or a negative effect on delinquency. And then you've just committed yourself to doing 3 years of research, not on racial disparities in arrest, but on how religion is good for alleviating delinquency. Wow. That can kind of influence what people are studying and what they're concluding. Sexuality has been one of the areas that conservative foundations have targeted as being an area of concern. And their general orientation is to reduce kind of science-based education about sexuality and to promote studies that would lead to public policy initiatives that limit the rights of individuals to engage in non-marital sexuality, that raises the cost of non-marital sexuality, and to forge public policy that punishes single parenthood, and especially, of course, in the contemporary environment now with our current questions about parental rights and marital rights for LGBT persons. And so this has been a big part of their initiative, and in steps my little buddy, Mark Regnerus, who I've known since his first year of graduate school at the University of North Carolina. Mark is an exceptionally brilliant young scholar. I have enormous respect for his intellect, and because I know him and I know how smart he is, I know why this occurred. He didn't do this because he doesn't know better. He didn't do this because he doesn't know what good science is. He didn't do this because he doesn't know how to use statistics. He did this because it was a part of his politicized agenda. This is what he was socialized to do. This is why he came to academia. This was his intention, that as soon as he made tenure at the University of Texas, he was going to go full-throated political. And this is easy to do. When you're a bona fide conservative Christian intellect, you can send out a 2.5-page letter to a couple of your old buddies from those summer seminars back in undergrad and take down $800,000 in grant money, which was used to fund his marriage project, as he called it, or whatever it is. This came from foundations that fly relatively under the radar. The Witherspoon Foundation, the Bradley Foundation are not ones that we typically talk about when we talk about conservative private research foundations. But they've got millions of dollars a year that they devote to this. Mark was able to get a large sum of money where he contracted with a private marketing firm to use what is essentially a convenience online sample to examine what he called same-sex parenting outcomes. Only he didn't have any same-sex parents. There were only 2 individuals in his study that were actually raised in same-sex families. And I don't even know if that's true given the screening question that was asked, which was something to the effect of, when you're between the ages 0 and 18, did your mother or father have a romantic relationship with someone of the same sex? I'm personally not certain that my parents had a romantic relationship with someone of the opposite sex. I'm not sure what that question means. This is a retrospective question being asked to adults between the ages, I think he cut it off at 20 and 40. He wanted to get a kind of young adult portrait and ask about retrospectively what they would do. And then they had all these things that retrospectively were asked, like, were you ever molested as a child? Do you have any mental health problems? Do you have a job? What's your highest level of education? Have you ever been arrested? Have you ever smoked marijuana? All these kinds of questions that raise a specter of negative outcomes, as they're often termed in research of this type. That's not social science research level social science in how we do things in family studies. If we were going to examine what is the effect of family structure on childhood outcomes, the gold standard for doing those kinds of studies in contemporary sociology would be longitudinal data collected over time from both parents and kids over a long period of time, so you can follow young people into young adulthood at least, like the National Longitudinal Survey of Adolescent Health, which is one of the few studies that's still going with federal funding. And then you can see what happened. Because we're talking about people who were raised by same-sex couples, you can never even do that with a general population survey. They're simply too rare. In order to do that, you would actually have to target people, to find people who were raised in that, and then follow them. And in fact, 2 of Regnerus's colleagues, Jennifer Glass and Deb Umberson, are in the process of doing that. We'll know what they find in a few decades. Because that's the way science works. It's slow and expensive and difficult. And that's why we should pay attention to it. But this wasn't. This was quick and dirty. Very dirty. People questioned, how on earth did this really bad paper get through? And I first learned about this from Seamus Khan at Columbia, who calls me out of the blue. I hardly even knew him. We'd only had one interaction. It was kind of negative. And he was saying, you're on the editorial board. Did you see this study from Regnerus? I said, no, I'm trying to finish my book. And he said, well, you got to see this. Give me a call later this afternoon. So I read it and go through this. Wow, that was bad. How did this get in? At the same time, I didn't realize this, but Elsevier, as well as a variety of different conservative foundations, were promoting this to the media. So you probably saw this in the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the LA Times, everyone. Mark Regnerus had his own piece in Slate, that hipster rag or whatever that's online, and talking about his little study about how gays and lesbians are bad parents, especially lesbians. They really don't like women. And this was something that was disturbing to me and to many others. And what was really disturbing was that the timeline for publication seemed out of whack. That it was submitted and accepted in a 6-week time frame. And it looked even worse if you looked at his code books and realized that Apparently, he submitted this paper before he even finished his data collection, which he admitted to later, that he was still receiving additional questionnaires